Good Saturday, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for September the 24th. Today we are reading together from Revelation chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11 is on the schedule for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hope that you've had a great week and looking forward to a good weekend. Of course, the highlight will be tomorrow as we get ready to gather together for our Bible studies and worship assembly. Again, thanks for tuning in. Let me go and get Revelation 11 up on the screen for us today. And I think I saw that today is Thomas Boyd's birthday. So T-Dog, happy birthday to you, young sir. As we're reading here in Revelation chapter 11, talking about the two witnesses, this is definitely one of the more popular sections of Revelation, just because of the various detail that is given here. I think it's also probably one of the more speculated sections of Revelation as well. People really want to know who these specific two witnesses are and the exact time in which these days that are numbered are going to take place. And because of that, and you have a number of theories, these theories normally fit to various type of end times systems, and that's just the reality of the landscape in which we live in and the way different people use the revelation. But just to remind us again of the type of literature that we're working with. It is apocalyptic in nature. It is highly symbolic, highly symbolic. So to say that there are going to be literally two witnesses, I don't know if I can really go there or not. I think they might be representative of something else. And again, this is a type of literature that would have been familiar with the Jews of this time. And I think because of that, they would have had a much better grasp on the meaning behind this than we do, because we are not in that environment, being familiar with this type of literature. And one thing also to keep in mind, and this goes along with the idea of prophecy. Prophecy again is often, sometimes it's foretelling, but it's always allowing mankind to have some sort of peek into the divine perspective of the world that's going on. Prophecies were given to mankind so that those men or women could serve as mouthpieces for God to give that divine perspective. One thing I'll always think about is we are very privileged to live in a time where so much prophecy has been fulfilled, and having the New Testament, we have the ability to look at the prophecies that were given in the prophets and elsewhere that pertain to Jesus. And we are able to see how those things pertaining to Jesus were obviously pointing to Jesus. And one thing I thought about was, it seems so easy for us to make those connections, but they didn't get that. It seems those who were receiving these prophecies and those who were living with those prophecies still unfulfilled, it seems if they didn't get what was going on. To me, looking backwards, I wonder, how did they miss that Jesus is the Messiah? And yeah, I think that's one of the aspects of prophecy that we really need to remember, that it was meant to be somewhat cryptic. It wasn't meant to be obvious to any and everyone who would read it. And one reason for that, again, in prepping for this, listening to some podcasts, doing some reading, one particular scholar was talking about how we have to remember that there are spiritual forces that are at work in this time period, and in Jesus' time especially. The evil one was at work. So it almost seems as if it would be counterintuitive to make these prophecies so obvious that even the evil one would recognize what was going on, and then therefore not carry out what God was trying to work out. And we might not think about that, but yeah, that seems plausible. That seems to make some sense. Why would God perfectly and clearly and easily telegraph his plan so that even the evil one would know it and therefore not go with it? Yeah, that's something to consider. So for us to sit here and to say, oh, we know exactly what every single one of these things means, well, that would seem to make it as if that this isn't really that much of an apocalyptic prophecy. That takes away the symbolism, and it makes it too easy to understand to where even the enemy would know what is going on. So just keep that in mind. So for me, as I'm going through this text, I'm frustrated a lot, honestly. I'm frustrated because I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around the exact meaning of what is going on here. And yet I have to remind myself that, maybe that's almost meant to be, that it's not supposed to be super easy to understand. So we ought to then be patient with ourselves, and also maybe give a little bit of room for those who have a little bit of a different understanding than us. I think that there are obviously some ways that people take the writing of the Revelation, run with it completely out to left field, and just very much abuse the text. We don't want to do that. We want to be very responsible in the way that we read Revelation, but we ought to do so with a bit of humility, recognizing the difficulty of text, and really the fact that it was probably supposed to be a little bit difficult, that those who are really spiritually minded and a good spiritual insight would understand it, but the enemy not so much. So keep that in mind as we're reading through here about the two witnesses. Remember again, too, that this is a letter written to specific people at a specific time for a specific purpose. So we need to try to understand as best we can, with an understanding in their understanding that's rooted in their understanding. We can't take this, just make it about us. This is not about us, at least not primarily about us. I think, especially today, as we're looking in chapter 11, I think we are at this point looking at some future things still yet to unfold. I think there's a lot of final judgment ideas and languages going on here in chapter 11. And you might be wondering, well, why would there be final judgment language in chapter 11 whenever we've still got another 11 chapters to go? I think the reason for that is because there's a lot of recapitulation going on here in the Revelation. It kind of goes in cycles again. I mentioned before that we can either read Revelation linearly. Yeah, we'll say this in a linear fashion, meaning straight through as a very one-way narrative. So we would read then the Revelation like we would read the book of Acts. And I'm not convinced. In fact, I'm leaning towards that being not the best way at all to read Revelation, that it much more seems to come in cycles, and that things are recapitulated, meaning that there's some final judgment language here, and then there's some more of the story retold in a different way, and final language there again, final judgment language there again, and it just keeps going in cycles and comes back to the same type of ideas, just puts them in a different light. That seems to be what's going on here, because the language again within this text seems to be final judgment language. Again, what exactly does that mean? I don't know. Can't give you the exact play-by-play, detail-by-detail breakdown of it, and especially to be able to say it with absolute certainty. I think another thing to keep in mind is that if anybody comes to you and says, "I know Revelation with absolute certainty, this is exactly what's going on," and just really pounds at that, and really just digs their flag in there and sets roots and say, "I know exactly what's going on in Revelation," I'd be really wary of that person. I really would. Because again, there's great difficulty with this text. I would be wary of the person who says with absolute certainty, this is exactly what Revelation means, point by point and detail by detail. I think we can understand with certainty the main point of the Revelation, the main point being God wins and God reigns and he will not be defeated. I believe that we could say that with great certainty. But what exactly that overall meaning, the detail of it, I think that's a lot more difficult to consider. So with all that said, let's read here in Revelation chapter 11. Let's think about the two witnesses, the witnesses being martyred. I think that the most responsible understanding of the two witnesses is not to see them as literal two witnesses, even as we see John's using language here that's taken from the prophets. Again, remember we saw that within the prophets, the last few that we read. I think Zechariah, maybe I should have written that down, where we have the two olive trees and giving oil to the lamp. I think Joshua and Zerubbabel were those. John's using that language here. He's borrowing that language and using it for his own purposes. I think when you recognize that John's doing that a lot too, which is why I keep bringing up various Old Testament tie-ins here in the Revelation, where John is using that language again to fit his own purposes and to make a particular point. But here I think the witnesses represent the church, that these two witnesses, you had to have at least two witnesses to make a witness valid, to make a testimony valid. So I think that's the reason why for the term two witnesses. But here the church is doing its thing, spreading the gospel, doing it for a particular time, and then there's going to be some trial against it. And yet in the end, again, at the end, Jesus wins. At the end, God reigns, and victory is had by those who were fighting for the Lord. I think that's a very basic, responsible understanding here of Revelation chapter 11. So let's read it, and let's see if you can see where that makes sense. So here in Revelation 11, verse number 1, then I was given a measuring reed like a rod with these words, "Go and measure the temple of God and the altar, and count those who worship there, but exclude the courtyard outside the temple. Don't measure it, because it is given to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. I will grant my 2 witnesses authority to prophesy for 1,260 days, dressed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone wants to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and consumes their enemies. If anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. They have authority to close up the sky so that it does not rain during the days of the prophecy. They also have power over the waters to turn them into blood and strike the earth with every plague whenever they want." So again, if you want to take this literally, are there literally going to be 2 witnesses, 2 individuals, 2 people who are going to be able to have fire come from their mouths to consume their enemies? We want to be consistent in our understanding of the revelation. Try our best to be consistent here. Are we going to take a literal approach, or are we going to take a symbolic approach? That's something to consider here as we read through. Verse number 7, when Revelation 11, verse number 7, when they finish their testimony, the beast that comes out of the abyss, remember we talked about that abyss recently, will make war on them, conquer them, and kill them. Their dead bodies will lie in the main street of the great city, which figuratively is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified, and some of their peoples, tribes, languages, and nations will view their bodies for 3.5 days and not permit their bodies to be put into a tomb. Those who live on the earth will gloat over them and celebrate and sing gifts to one another, because these 2 prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet. Great fear fell on those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." They went up to heaven in a cloud while their enemies watched them. At that moment, a violent earthquake took place. 1/10 of the city fell, and 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. The survivors were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe has passed. Take note, the third woe is coming soon. The 7th angel blew his trumpet, and there were 3 loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever." The 24 elders who were seated before God on their thrones fell down and worshiped God, saying, "We give thanks, Lord God the Almighty, who is and who was, because you have taken your great power and have begun to reign. The nations were angry, but your wrath has come. The time has come for the dead to be judged, and to give the reward to your servants, the prophets, to the saints, and to those who fear your name, both small and great. And the time has come to destroy those who destroy the earth." Then the temple of God in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant appeared in his temple. There were flashes of lightning, rumblings and peals of thunder, an earthquake, and severe hail. And that concludes Revelation chapter 11. Again, it's hard for me to get past language such as the time has come for the dead to be judged, and to give the reward to your servants, the prophets, to the saints, those who fear your name, both small and great. And the time has come to destroy those who destroy the earth. That sounds very ultimate day of the Lord language like. That sounds very much like that. Again, how can that take place here in chapter 11? I think because of the use of recapitulation. What we have within Revelation, again, is not a linear reading. It's not straight from beginning to end, but is a retelling of the same sort of story and events. Why would God do this? Why would God give this type of revelation to John through Jesus? To encourage the saints. to encourage them. Because those, again, who were receiving this letter, they were going through very real persecution. It's hard for us to comprehend that because we have never experienced such a thing at all. And yet that's really what they were going through. And we need to recognize that. We need to respect that. And we need to allow this text to be an encouraging text to them. That's what we need to allow this text to be, an encouraging text to them that also encourages us, knowing that God will never be defeated, no matter what the enemy might throw at him, no matter what the forces of evil might do to stand against his kingdom and against his church and against his people. God still reigns. God wins. And in the end, the wicked will be judged. Thanks so much for tuning into this reading of Revelation 11. We'll get back into another sort of cycle tomorrow as we read through chapter 12, which introduces the story from the perspective of the woman, the child, and the dragon. Again, I think this is, a retelling of some of the similar events that we've seen already. And I look forward to reading that together with you. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Have a good Saturday. We'll read together again in the morning, 8 a.m. We'll read together from Revelation